Jesus and his next I am statement, one that we're pretty familiar with to it. But I'm going to get us through kind of the narrative up to this point, walk through what happens in this, and then we'll break it down. So Jesus had been traveling all through Galilee just before this, and we had talked about, and leading to this turn point that had happened, that there was tension between Jesus and many of the religious leaders at this point. We've heard they were now taking a moment to look for the proper opportunity that they could execute him. So moving along the towns of Galilee, Jesus continues teaching while also working to avoid those that were actively plotting against him. And soon, the season approaches for one of Israel's big celebrations. It's the Feast of Tabernacles, which is, of course, one we're very familiar with. When we think through the great Jewish holidays, we think, oh yeah, the Feast of Tabernacles, obviously. But this is a big one. And his brothers, the disciples, had spoken to him with a mixture of a little bit of skepticism and a challenge. Coming up to this moment, they urged him, we're going to go to Judea and then show your works in all of Jerusalem. You need to make an appearance at this feast. If you really wanted followers, if you really, really wanted it, hiding in the countryside doesn't make sense anymore. A public demonstration during such a major festival would certainly bring proof to the claims that you've been saying. But Jesus tells them right there that his moment still had not yet arrived, but they were free to travel about wherever that they had wished. But the world would react very differently to me because they spoke so openly about what they want to do with me, and I speak so openly about their wrongdoings. For now, you can go to the festival without me. So the disciples leave for Jerusalem. For a while, Jesus remains, though, in Galilee, and later he decides he's going to quietly travel to the festival as well, not publicly with a group of pilgrims, but much more discreetly. He's sneaking his way in. I forget exactly how it puts it on here, but we'll get to it eventually. So meanwhile, the city has already crowded with the worshipers that had come from all over the place. The religious leaders were searching the crowds, asking and wondering if anyone had seen Jesus or if he was going to make an appearance at it. And among the people that were there was a constant whisper about Jesus. Some thought he was a good man. Others insisted he was misleading the public. Yet these discussions rarely happened openly because many of them would fear the same retribution from the authorities. Now, about halfway through this festival week, Jesus finally sneaks his way into the courts of the temple and begins to teach. Now, his words quickly draw attention. Many who had heard him were astonished at his deep understanding of Scripture. They knew that he was not formally trained in the schools of religious scholars, but he spoke with a remarkable insight. Jesus explains that his teaching doesn't come from himself, but from the one who had sent him. And anyone truly committed to doing God's will would recognize whether his message came from God or simply from his own invention. He points out that those who speak only for themselves often look for personal glory, but those who seek the honor of the one that sent him speak the truth. He reminds them of the law that was given to them through Moses. That although people claimed devotion to that law, many of them were not truly keeping it, especially since some were trying to kill him. Now this gives the crowd a pause and a little air of confusion. Many insisted that he must be imagining things or suffering from some demonic possession if he really believed that someone out there would be plotting his death so fervently. And Jesus answers by referring to an earlier miracle that he had performed on the Sabbath, healing a man that had stirred such outrage among the leaders. Points out their inconsistency. See, according to the law, a boy could be circumcised on the Sabbath. But if he happened to fall on the 8th day after, it could be circumcised on the Sabbath if it happened to fall on the 8th day after his birth, which is when it's traditionally done. If they permitted an act of healing of the body on the Sabbath day, then why were they so furious that he had restored an entire person to health on the same? Instead of judging by only outward rules, he urged them to consider what would be truly right. Now some of that were hearing it began whispering among themselves, and they recognized him as a man that certain leaders want dead. Yet here he was speaking openly in the temple courts, and no one stopped him. Had the authorities secretly concluded that he might actually be the promised Messiah? Still, others in the crowd objected. They believed they knew where Jesus came from, that his hometown and his family, according to their own expectations, their own prophecies, the Messiah would appear suddenly and mysteriously, not in some stable as a newborn. Jesus responds by raising his voice so nearly everyone in the crowd could hear, and he said, "Yes, they thought you knew where I came from, but in reality, you don't know the one who sent me." He insisted that had they known the sender personally, they would know where he came from. Now at this point, the religious leaders make their way into the temple and attempt to actually seize him, arrest him in this moment, and yet somehow none of them were able to lay a hand on him. Despite the hostility, many of the people in the crowd began to believe him. And they reasoned that when the Messiah would come, it would be hard to imagine that he would perform any greater signs than the one that Jesus had already done. Now the Pharisees hear these murmurs spreading through the crowd, and they grow more and more alarmed. And together with the chief priests, they sent the temple guards once again to attempt to arrest him. Aware of this, Jesus tells the listeners that he would remain with them only a little bit longer before returning to the one who had sent him. And after that, people wouldn't be able to find him. Where was he going? That they would not be able to go with him. Some wondered whether he intended to travel to the Jewish communities scattered among the Greek-speaking nations. Others questioned how he could speak of going to some place that would be so unreachable. Now, on the final day of the festival, there came the most dramatic little thing that would happen. During this feast of the tabernacles, water ceremonies celebrated God's provision and symbolized the hope of a future blessing. This is something that they do on it. And on that final day, with the big hurrah of the festival accumulating, Jesus stood and called out loudly and gathered the crowds up near him. He invited anyone who was spiritually thirsty to come to him and take a drink. Those who trusted him, he explained, would experience something like streams of living water flowing within them. By this, he was speaking about the Spirit who would later be given to those who believe. Some in the crowd concluded that he must be this long-awaited prophet. Others declared he was obviously the Messiah, but not all of them agreed again. Some argued the Messiah must come from Bethlehem, the town of David, while Jesus was known that he came out of Galilee. The crowd is divided. Some work with the Pharisees and the religious leaders to arrest him, but once again, none of them succeed. Eventually, the temple guards make it back to the religious leaders empty-handed, and the Pharisees demand to know, how possibly did you fail to arrest a man standing in front of everybody? They could only answer that they had never heard anyone speak the way that Jesus did. And the religious leaders respond with anger at the temple guards. Were the guards deceived as well? None of the authorities or the Pharisees believed him. Only an ignorant crowd could follow such a person. Yet, one voice within the crowd spoke cautiously. His name was Nicodemus, who had previously met Jesus. He reminded them that their law required hearing a man's case before judging them. Others dismissed Nicodemus' suggestion, mocking him. And they asked whether he too had come from Galilee. A careful looking at the scriptures, they insisted, would note that no prophet would arise from that region. And with this debate unsolved and the tension among the religious leaders high, the gathering eventually breaks apart. And the people return to their homes, leaving the question of Jesus' identity hanging heavy over this city unresolved. But Jesus continues his teaching at the temple courts even as the festival has wrapped itself up. And he speaks to those listening, and he describes himself as a light shining in the dark world, a guide for those willing to follow him. He says, "I am the light of the world." Those who walked with him, he said, would not wander blindly, but would find a path that leads them to life. Now the Pharisees in the crowd challenge this immediately, and they argue that he's making claims about himself without any possible proof. In legal tradition, a person cannot establish truth by themselves, but they need witnesses to confirm it. So he answers that his testimony was reliable, because he knew where he had come from, where he was going, even if they couldn't possibly see it. And he reminds them his witness is not solitary, but the Father who sent him confirms his words. They asked him then, "Where is this Father?" Jesus explains that their inability to recognize revealed something deeper inside of them. They really didn't know the one who sent him. Because if they understood God, if they knew God, they would recognize the one standing in front of them. The discussion grows a little bit sharper. Jesus warns that refusing this truth would lead them towards a spiral of ultimate death. They question his identity again and again, struggling to understand what he means. But he insists that everything that he had said comes from the Father that had sent him. Among a few of those listeners were some that began to believe him. And to them he offers one promise. If you would hold firmly to his teaching, to my teaching, you would truly become my disciples. The truth that they discovered would bring freedom. But the others still rejected him strongly. They pointed out his heritage, to their heritage as descendants of Abraham, insisting that they had never really truly been enslaved like their ancestors. How could he possibly speak about setting them free then? Jesus explains that the slavery that he would break them from was not political, but one of spiritual enslavement. Anyone who continuously practices sin becomes bound by it, like a servant trapped in a household. True freedom comes from only the Son who grants that release, a freedom that can't be taken away. The conversation turns even more tense if it was possible. Jesus acknowledges their physical descent from Abraham, but points out that their actions don't actually resemble the faith of their ancestor Abraham. Instead of welcoming the truth that he spoke of, which Abraham would have recognized, they were seeking ways to silence him. They protested, claiming God himself as his father. He's our father, the father of Abraham. If God were truly your father, you would know that he had sent me. Jesus describes the source of lies and violence and says that their refusal of the truth reflects the same spirit. They accuse Jesus then of being possessed by a demon and mock his claims, but he remains steady, not seeking my own glory, but honoring the one who sent me, my own Father. Anyone who keeps his word would ultimately escape this death. The religious leaders remind him that even Abraham and the prophets had died. Who do you think you are that you could possibly escape death? And he said something even more astonishing. That Abraham had looked forward to the day when God's promise would be fulfilled, and that expectation had filled him with joy of who would be coming in front of him. Now the crowd is having a hard time understanding this. Jesus is not even 50 years old. How could he claim to have seen the excitement in Abraham about what would be coming? He told them that his existence didn't begin in the boundaries of time, but before Abraham was born, ego eimi, I am. The implication was unmistakable. Many considered that to be blasphemous. They picked up stones from the ground, preparing to strike him down in the temple courtyard. But amid the confusion, he slips away through the crowd and left the temple grounds, and their stones fall back down to earth. And in a morning that had begun with a quiet teaching ended in a stunned silence. The people who heard him were left wrestling with a question that refused to disappear from their heads. Who exactly could this man be who speaks with such authority? Jesus' words in chapters 7 and 8 of John happened during, again, the Feast of the Tabernacles. And if you look all the way to the beginning of chapter 7, and you read about the Feast of the Tabernacles, or the Feast of the Booths, you might see it called in some translations, Jesus' brothers set out, right, on their own ideas for Jesus' journey. Hey, here's what we think you should be doing. You need to go up to the feast with us. Make a big scene. Enter in with a big crowd. Like, come in through the front gate, like Prince Ali in Aladdin, right? The elephants kick the door down. Like, he's got 75 golden monkeys, whatever it is. Jesus disagrees, not wanting to make a public appearance. And then he goes from Galilee to Jerusalem for the feast on his own, quietly. Now, a little background for the feast to help us understand what's going on and to help us see why the people are so tense with Jesus' words here. It's instituted in the book of Leviticus, which if you've never read the book of Leviticus before, congratulations. Right? It's terrible. No, it's boring. It's just laws. It's just rules. Hey, this is how you do a grain offering. Hey, this is how you do a dove offering. Hey, this is how you do a peace offering. Hey, this is a festival. Hey, this is another festival. Very dry. It's instituted in there. It's a 7-day festival. Very important. 7. There you go. To commemorate God's provision for the Israelites as they were led out of Egypt into the wilderness. Now, they were led by a cloud and a fiery pillar. Cloud by day, fire by night. And for 7 days, the Israelites were supposed to live inside their tents, these booths, right? However you want to translate tabernacle, a little tent. Now, the significance for this feast was a little less than little leafy tabernacles that the Israelites would build, and that more light would stream through the leaves over their heads, not just the light of the sun, but the light of this fiery pillar that led them each night to the resting place. So they would build these makeshift little tents, and they would lay in them and let the sun shine through the leaves onto their face, like they were being led by fire at night. You would see the symbolism that's happening here. Good. Great. On the first day of the festival, it's the 15th day of the 7th month, there you go, the sun was setting, followed directly by the rising of the moon. So continuous light, which points itself to this continuous light of God that led them. This is the symbols that we're getting for it. It's during this festival of continuous light, of the moonlight and the sunlight as they lay outside to let it bask in them as God once led them through them, that Jesus arrives on the scene and gives probably his most famous I am statement, which is, I am the light of the world. Now, do you catch Jesus crapping on their festival in front of them? You with me? Why they're very upset by this? It's clear the claim he's making. We are celebrating God's provision, the light that was given to us to guide us in the desert. And you show up claiming you are the same light. For them, Jesus would be the fulfillment of the Feast of the Tabernacles, a physical light to guide them. This whole conversation that goes on from chapter 7 through 8, this back and forth between the crowd and Jesus and the religious leaders that he's having during the Feast of the Tabernacle centers around this question of Jesus' true identity. Who is he? The Pharisees challenge him in chapter 8. It shows how much they just don't want to believe him. How blinded they are to the light that stands in front of them. Here you are, appearing as your own witness. It's not valid testimony. They're holding on to Deuteronomy. A matter is established by the testimony of at least 2 or 3 witnesses. And Jesus responds in no uncertain terms. Even if I were to testify on my own behalf, it's valid. The light of the world can say that in a way no one else can, because that's the way that light is. Anything that is not light needs light to illuminate it. It needs a witness, the light, to illuminate the things so people can see it. You ever been in a very dark room? Lena, you're ever in a courtroom with the lights off and you're like, if you would take a look at Exhibit B, like it's just not going to go well. You with me? It needs light to defend it, to define it, to expose it in some way. Light is light, though. It doesn't need anything to expose it. It does the exposing. Jesus is light. He doesn't need witnesses to expose the truth. He doesn't need an argument to shed light on his divinity. He just is. And if the Pharisees really needed another witness, Jesus gives them the Father, the one he came from, the one he's coming to. But for those who are blind in their own sins, the light shines in the darkness, but darkness doesn't understand it. Where is your Father? They ask then. You don't know me or my Father, then Jesus says. you're blind. Because if you knew me, you would know my Father too. And some crucial words for the own purpose of understanding this morning. Jesus says, he spoke these words while teaching the temple area near the place where the offerings were put. I've done this before, so I'm not going to do the whole shebang again. But the place where offerings are laid in the temple is inside the court of the women. It's the farthest outside court, but like if you're Jewish. This, like women, non-Jewish people, Jewish women, Jewish men, priests, the high priest, Holy of Holies. You got to get closer and closer. This is where offerings are laid in the court of the women. And if the day before the last had been the greatest day of the whole festival, right? Remember, this is a big day, and he's standing in there. The court would have been ringing with the noise of spiritual activity that happened at the nighttime of the festivals. Because every evening, crowds and worshipers would gather in there. There were 4 ginormous lamps set at the corners of the women's court, and each lampstand on it had 4 bowls of oil with wicks inside of it. So you got to picture it. You're standing in the 4 corners of this. There's big pillars, and inside of each of those pillars, there's 4 bowls of oil with wicks in them. So there are how many candles? Great, we're alive. Good. Very, very, very big, very bright. The wicks in those bowls were made from the discarded undergarments of priests, and all night long, priestly families would climb up and down ladders. They would fill and refill these bowls of oil so that those lamps would burn and burn and burn like the pillar of fire that had led their fathers and mothers through the wilderness. The light of those 16 bowls bounced off the bronze gates at the end of the courtyard and the white walls of the temple. And the lights were so bright that it illuminated the courtyard to be visible outside through the city if you were high enough. There was music playing, harps and lyres and cymbals and trumpets, and Jewish men that were known for their good dancing danced with 8 torches in their hand and sang the psalms of ascent. Praise the Lord, all your servants of the Lord who minister by night in the house of the Lord. Lift your hands to the sanctuary. Praise the Lord. May the maker of heaven and earth bless you. The memory of that night before, burning candles and guys juggling torches while they dance and blanging trumpets and stringing of lyres was present still in the court when Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness. Sometimes it's hard to believe everything Jesus says in this little back and forth with our Pharisees, because it certainly does feel like sometimes there is a walking in the darkness that we experience. Jesus is about to go through one after the Mount of Olives. We do walk through the valley of the shadow of death, through a shadowed land. Sometimes we're doing it now. I don't know everyone's story in the whole world, but I know I've been there. The phone doesn't ring like you wish it would. You miss someone so much you wish you could just be with them one more time. The stress of life is more than you can bear. That's walking through a dark valley. And yet, it's not. Because you have a place to hide. This is what Jesus is getting at with this statement. You can hide inside the light. He's telling them, I'm the light and the salvation. Because of Jesus, you can say the words from Isaiah. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. Not the light of the wicked candles, not the juggling dudes with the torches, not the sun beating through the leaves of your canopy, not the sun, but the sun. They've seen a great light. Of those that were living in the land of the shadow of death, a great new day has dawned. Jesus says, Ego eimi, I am the light of the world. And in the darkness of the Pharisees mounting suspicions and accusations, the light of the world was beginning to dawn on those in the temple. I wonder where the light will dawn on me, where my shadowlands will begin to warm and brighten by the light of Christ when I begin to look for it again. When we feel like we're walking through those darkness, we need to see the light of Jesus as much as those of us who feel like we're walking in the light. You go through gives and takes, peaks and valleys. Light shines brightest in the darkest places. The light of the lampstands and the torches that lit up Jerusalem nights at the Feast of the Tabernacles were the brightest those lights seemed. What happened when the first light of day breaks over the Mount of Olives? 2 priests during this festival would sound the ram's horn. They would walk eastward through the temple court toward the rising sun. And then they would turn around with their backs to the sun in order to declare their faith in God. A direct contradiction to the actions of their forefathers. Men that stood in those inner courts and turned their backs on the temple of the Lord and faced east to worship the sun as it rise. In the darkness of the Shadowlands, I don't want to say it's easy to just say, just look for the light. It's not easy to just trust in Jesus as the light and salvation. But it is the likely story. We should turn to Jesus, really rely on Jesus when we're lonely, when we're grieving, when we're hopeless, when confused. When the storms come, the storm clouds darken the thing, we look for the light of the world to break through those clouds. Just yesterday, my wife took the girls to go Easter dress shopping. I didn't go. I babysat my dad. For those of you who don't know, my dad has Alzheimer's. And we had a 2.5-hour conversation about the state of IU basketball that lasted about 5 minutes, and then it recycled. And I decided we'd go to lunch. And it was cold still. And he said, is it supposed to be warm today? We were at B-dubs, or not B-dubs, Wings, etc. And he said, is it supposed to be warm today? And I said, I think it will as soon as the clouds start to break up. It was very overcast, and as soon as the sun peeks through, it'll start to warm up. And we had a really great lunch. The light seems to shine the brightest and be the warmest in the darkest of times. It was not fun yesterday, but the sun shone through the clouds. We look for that light to peek through when it's cold and dark. But when the great light of the planet, of the earth, that breaks through the clouds in the winter on a cold spring morning, it's tempting to forget about the light of the world. When the sun rises, it's tempting to put my trust in that sun. I lift my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? Not from statistics, not from a psychologist telling me that I'm normal, not from my therapist telling me how to get through anything, not from my ability to bounce back after I've had a tough time, not from escaping the reality of this world by getting into a good book, not from the hands of a surgeon. I lift my eyes up to 1,000 earthly suns that warm up my life, but where does my help come from? From the maker of heaven and earth and all the gifts we get. And so with the priests, during this Feast of the Tabernacles, may we turn our back on that rising sun and face the court of the women and Jesus, standing near the place where the offerings are laid, and say, you are the light. As eager as I am for spring, even though my neighbor already mowed his yard, which is just ridiculous at this point, and as much as I long for it, there is a light that we should long for more. After sleepless nights and falling back and springing forward, as much as we long for the day to be longer and the nights to be shorter, there is a light we should do more. With the Jewish men dancing in the temple courts with their torches, we sing, I wait for the Lord, my soul waits, for there I will put my hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than the watchmen wait for the morning. There is a sense in which the rhythms of earth don't bear to the rhythms of our own soul. It might still be literally dark outside when I take my girls to school in the morning, in the long nights of the winter, as we eager for spring before we spring forward and it becomes bright for way too late into the evening. It may be metaphorically dark in your life, a shadow land, or it may be metaphorically bright. Relative ease and enjoyment. Lucky you. But no matter what, with that same light, Jesus, the light of the world, shines the true light in our life. And the question becomes, will we turn our back and face Him? When the light of Christ is the light that you live by, it reflects off of you like it bounces off the white walls of the temple and the brass gates. It reflects in such a way that Jesus goes so far as to say to us that we are the light of the world and that we are to let our light shine before others, that they might see the good deeds and praise his Father in heaven.